Welcome aboard for our ongoing Bible tour. Today we make the second stop, Psalm 18, a Psalm of David. We can only take in some highlights because it is 50 verses long. There are signs that this particular psalm grew larger over the course of time. I perceive in the psalm 3 growth rings from 3 distinct periods of the life of David. David's boyhood as a shepherd, David's adulthood as a warrior, and David's old age as a king. The core of the psalm seems to come from his boyhood. For many of his young years, David cared for sheep. As the littlest in his family, he had no younger brother to relieve him of this job. So he probably stayed with the sheep longer than any of his 7 older brothers. In good weather, he had to watch for predators. Making music was one way to warn them off. Poor boys could fashion simple flutes out of reeds. Wealthier boys brought fancy harps with them. You can't sing while playing the flute, but you can while playing the harp. Jesse was a wealthier man, and so he gave his son David a nice harp. It was for his protection, as well as that of the sheep. Maybe Jesse in his own youth had played that very harp, and maybe the instrument had passed down from brother to younger brother, from Eliab to Aminadab to Shemaiah to Nethanel to Raddai to Ozem, and at last to David. They may or may not have used the instrument, but David surely did. And that is how, in good weather, the boy David became a psalmist. In bad weather, David could retreat to his cave with some of the lambs. From the cave, he saw the flock huddled together with their backs to the wind, under the thunder and lightning, under the snow or rain, in the face of a sandstorm. When the storm was over, he would reassure the flock with a song of deliverance. That is the kernel of this psalm. It is the song of a courageous man-boy, brave in the face of the elements. Listen to how he sings about the storm. Vayet shamayim vayirad varafel tachat raglav. He crossed the sky and came down, and darkness was beneath his feet. He mounted upon a cherub and flew, and glided on wings of wind. He donned darkness as his disguise about him, as his cover darkening waters in canopies of clouds. His canopies crossed from the splendor of his side, hail and coals of flame. This is high poetic language from someone who knows well the signs of the sky. When your animals live outdoors, you think about the weather all the time. I asked those who have sheep, and they told me that lightning can strike a flock and leave many dead or injured. The Good Shepherd takes care for his own safety and fears for the safety of his flock. He hopes and prays for them and for himself. When the storm has passed by, he thanks God and he sings and maybe even dances. Later, the shepherd will grow into a warrior and will have to face a different kind of enemy. The language of that kind of conflict enters into the later part of this psalm. واشحكم كعفار على pnei ruach كتيت חוצות arikim. I crushed them like dust in the face of wind. Like dirt from the streets, I shook them off. That is not how a shepherd boy would speak. That sounds like a soldier boasting after battle. David, though victorious in combat, is now finding himself pursued by his own king, his father-in-law. He is back in the same cave which sheltered him in his youth. But now he has no sheep. In fact, no companions at all. He is more alone now than ever before in his life. There were many ups and downs in his life, but this moment is the dark night of his soul. He had no enemies before but wolves and storms, but God was always with him. Now he has no friend but God and Jonathan, his brother-in-law, the son of the jealous king. He has no harp this time, but naturally he remembers the song that he sang to his sheep back in those days. He remakes the song from the point of view of this new situation in life. The shepherd's poem is filled with awe for the power of God in nature. The warrior makes the storm a metaphor for the battle against one's enemies. The warrior adds some new verses, comparing his numerous foes to obnoxious dust and dirt. This double simile harkens back to Psalm 1. Remember how the wicked were like chaff in the wind? Yes, chaff and dust and dirt are synonyms for all practical purposes. You don't want to get them in your face or in the pores of your skin. They assault your person. They are your enemies. As the fugitive warrior David looked from his cave, they blew in his eyes, and they gave him a powerful image with which to expand his poem. Many years later, the old King David found himself imprisoned again in his own palace by physical weakness. He returned to his song collection and greatly expanded it. Many scholars say the title and conclusion of this psalm come from a much later editor because they mention David in the third person. Maybe they are right. But it seems to me that this is how an old man might speak about his own youth, as if I were to say, Joseph Panessa was a zealous young priest. The mention of David both at the beginning and at the end is the poetic device of inclusion, like a formal signature by which a poet can claim the whole work as his own. This whole psalm comes back again as chapter 22 of 2 Samuel. There too David appears by name in the first verse as well as in the last. But only Psalm 18 has one very important late addition. The very first word of the very first line of the poem. Erhamcha Adonai chizki, Adonai salri umetzudathi. I love you, Adonai, my strength, Adonai, my bedrock and my fortress. I see the old king and him alone adding, I love you, to the beginning of his fine poem. But I cannot see him or anyone else subtracting it once it was there. It is the finishing touch, like the smile of the Mona Lisa, that gives final meaning to the whole work of art. The shepherd boy wrote a profession of faith. The fugitive warrior transformed it into an expression of hope, and the aged king framed it as a final declaration of love. The psalm has left behind a paper trail from faith through hope to love. Years ago, I gave a little homily on Psalm 18. Eventually, it became the second homily in my recent book, Homilies from Montana. It was 1975 in Billings, Montana, and I said this. Once upon a time, not long ago, I was really taken by surprise. I was speaking with one of my high school students, and out of the blue he said, I love God. Seldom does anyone speak so directly about what he has inside. He could hardly have chosen better words. He did not say, I believe in God, but it was unnecessary to say so. No one loves what he does not know. Belief is not yet love, but love already presumes faith. Nor did he say, I hope in God. But hope is the driving force of faith and love. Hope springs eternal in the human breast. Still do I dare to hope for the love of the good God in whom I believe. Paul says, there are these three, faith, hope, and love, but the greatest of these is love. There is the greatest commandment, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart. And there is also the commandment, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. We owe God the highest place from which he can assign places to all of us. Please let me say it once again. You, O God, must always come first. In loving you, we become strong. In forgetting you, we become weak. Help us to recall and reflect on this every time we say, yes, I love you, Lord, my strength.